Are Telstra's new mobile bundles a good deal for families?
And why is the ACCC taking 5G providers to court? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined, as always, by Adam Turner. Hey Adam, British band Muse is going to become the first band in history eligible to chart in Australia with an album that is an NFT.
Ugh.
Are you keen to embrace the NFT music revolution?
I think probably says it all, actually. Look, if Hendrix wants to put out some new material, I'm all up for it. Apart from that, hard pass.
I get the feeling the Hendrix estate might be lining up an NFT if it hasn't already done so. We're also joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by Finder Editor-in-Chief Angus Kidman. Gus, would you line up to buy an NFT album?
I don't know whether I'd line up, but I'm a connoisseur of pointless formats. I've recently bought an autographed copy of Bananarana's new album on cassette tape. So yeah, let's face it, I'm probably a sucker for this kind of thing.
So basically, when ABBA outs their next album as an NFT-only enterprise, you're going to buy one?
Oh, absolutely.
But only on 8-track.
Yes, I want an 8-track NFT. That will be the crucial element of the format.
Technology innovation. Well, it's a big week in telco news, with Telstra announcing new family bundles to theoretically save you heaps of cash, but will they? Before we look into the details of that, Telstra's also in the headlines thanks to the ACCC, with the regulator accusing the telco of spectrum hoarding in a way that could impact 5G coverage on other telcos. Gus, what's the story here?
So this is an interesting one, and it's a good example of the chicanery that goes on amongst telcos. So basically, some of Optus's 5G spectrum includes a bunch of 900 megahertz spectrum, which they get access to in 2024, but Telstra has it right now. Telstra wasn't doing anything with it until earlier this year. It decided to suddenly say, hey, we're going to set up 360 sites that use that exact piece of spectrum. And they registered these 360 sites that we want to use it, and then did nothing with them. And basically, the ACCC came to the conclusion that they'd done this to make it harder for Optus to do early testing using that spectrum by them saying, hey, no, we've got these sites where we might need to use it. And basically, the ACCC has got a court-enforceable undertaking from Telstra saying that that was a really naughty thing to do and they will stop doing it.
So this was spectrum that they'd had, I think, it was like old 2G spectrum that they still technically sort of had the rights to. Till Optus bid on it. I think it was last year they got it all.
Optus bid on it last year, but Optus wasn't supposed to be actively using it until 2024. But as we know, 5G, there's lots of advanced testing that happens. And the interpretation was that basically Telstra was trying to make it a bit harder for Optus to run its own test and see what was going on with that. And pleasingly, from my perspective, the ACCC said, no, you shouldn't do that. And it's good because we know that often the ACCC can feel like a bit of a toothless tiger. We've certainly said that about them on this podcast before. So it's good to see that sometimes they can actually go out there and actually get an undertaking and say, hey, no, if someone's bid on this stuff, you can't unreasonably make it difficult for them to use it.
And and the ACCC didn't really leave any doubt there. They said that what Telstra had done had the substantial purpose or likely effect of preventing or hindering Optus. So in other words, to use a technical term, it was a deliberate dick move.
Yes, that very much is the technical term that I think we would roll out in this case. And I mean, as I enjoy the fact the ACCC had a victory, I also enjoyed that in their official announcement, they outlined the last 4 times they'd busted Telstra for various other forms of behaviour, and they've been fined for irresponsibly selling plans to Indigenous consumers and claiming that people could get speeds when they actually could. What amused me is that despite having this kind of laundry list of bad behaviour, they didn't list my favourite example of Telstra being very much its own anti-competitive creature, and which goes way, 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 way back in time. Do you remember a time before the NBN?
Dimly, distantly?
We do, sadly.
Yeah.
And the one that I always remember, and I'm sure you gentlemen will too, was just the infamous behaviour where you decided you wanted a faster ADSL service. Oh. You go through your preferred ISP and say, hey, can I get this in my exchange? And they'd say, oh, no, sorry, there's nothing available in the exchange. But then if you went through Telstra, Suddenly there was a slot in the exchange and they could fit you in. And
because
this was
who told them nothing was available at the exchange? Telstra.
Exactly. So, I mean, as we know, that was one of the precursor behaviours that led to the idea that we needed the NBN.
Yeah.
But it wasn't enough just to have this kind of lightly regulated system. But, yeah, the whole thing just reminds me that, okay, telcos are big businesses, and big businesses sometimes can act pretty dirty.
Telcos, though, are all fairly guilty of this. I mean, the ACCC has chased Optus
next
and
level.
Vodafone.
No, there's no one can compare with Telstra. One of my favourite Telstra, anti-competitive stories is way, way back in the day of dial-up, where Telstra was offered dial-up to its customers, but also wholesale dial-up to a lot of other little ISPs. And then one day, Telstra came out and dropped the price of its dial-up service for its customers lower than the wholesale price it charged everybody else. So no one could compete with Telstra. And by the time the ACCC managed to do anything about it, Telstra had wiped out a whole lot of small ISPs. That's the kind of, as we say, dick move that you get from Telstra.
Yeah, and you see this massive reduction. I mean, again, this is just turning into old men reminiscing about bad things Telstra has done, basically. But
but they keep doing it. We're not reminiscing about the past. We're reminiscing about the fact that the ACCC is telling them off for doing it today still.
Okay, so we had this comment actually come up from Dan Tyson. I think it was the second last time he was on the show. We were talking about 5G access, and he was kind of saying, look, I'd have to drive 2 hours away to actually be near a 5G tower. Now, I think things in his area have probably improved a little bit then. But how much do we think this actually matters, given the majority of phones out there are still 4G? There's obviously a lot of, frankly, nutcases out there who are worried about the impact of 4G on their genitals or whatever their current cause celebrity is. But how much of an actual impact is this kind of stuff going to have on the 5G rollout in Australia?
Potentially, if Optus can't do the testing with that very specific bit of spectrum, we know that having the range of spectrum is important so that you can get that distance coverage. I think that's where the 900 megahertz census did in this space. So if they don't have the ability to test that, it's actually going to impact exactly that ability to have it going into wider areas as opposed to the very concentrated urban rollouts, which were the first things that we saw happening with this. So I think, it is important that, the telcos have the chance to test that. And, it's also a reminder that, if people bid on spectrum, they probably should use it. Like, there's been talk about there should be more heavily enforced use it or lose it clauses around these things. And this kind of bad behaviour makes that regulation a bit more likely, I think. And it feels more likely in an environment where we've seen there's an increased willingness under the current government to say, hey, we're going to go and slap these things around. We saw that with the special access undertaking rules around the NBN, and I feel like we could see similar things happening in 5G as well.
And I might be pointing my finger at the wrong telco here, but isn't Optus the one that's well known for having great coverage outdoors, and then as soon as you step inside, it's dropped us? Is that Optus or is that Vodafone?
So Optus is more honest to be fair. I think Optus is just a little bit more honest about the reality of what 5G coverage means and how much it can drop in an indoor setting. Some of that does relate, yes, to some of the 5G technologies that they've rolled out and the bands that they operate within. But that is an ongoing rolling problem, especially for higher speed 5G connections.
The point I was trying to make is that 900 megahertz is then really important to Optus because the lower the frequency, the better it does at penetrating things like buildings. So Optus will want to be doing a lot of testing on the 900 megahertz because that's what's going to be able to get them to match the kind of indoor coverage that you might get from another telco. So I can see why Optus would be very upset about this.
And the thing is, we're definitely now into the kind of measuring contest part of the 5G game because they're all starting to talk about how much 5G coverage they have. But as always, I've got to sound the alarm bell there because they always talk in terms of population figures, and the vast majority of Australians live in cities, not in rural or regional areas. So as soon as you actually go outside those areas, you're going to drop off the 5G pretty quickly.
Yeah. So we'll really know that 5G's arrived when we know that there's good 5G reception in Batuta.
So, Gus, speaking of everyone's favourite telco, Telstra has new family bundles, but they're not necessarily the great plan that you might think they are.
No, they're not. I mean, it's, my standard advice to people in everything, not just with telco plans, but also, with broadband, even with things like insurance and stuff, is bundling is very rarely a good idea. You very rarely save money by putting all your eggs in one basket. You save your provider some hassle, but you don't save yourself much hassle. So I always advise people not to go for that. But Telstra has revamped its plans now so that, if you're on some of its existing plans, you can now start adding extra SIMs onto that, share that data around your family, and maybe pay a little bit less. But the devil really is in the detail with these plans.
All right, well, glass half full, then why would you want to do this? What are the benefits of it?
So the benefits are basically, the big headline thing is that their 15 gig plan is cheaper than it would otherwise be if you bundle it with an existing, I think it's like a $65 or more plan. You've got to be on a higher tier plan, and then your kids or your other family members are on this 15 gig plan, which is cheaper than it would normally be. And
how much is cheaper?
Well, not necessarily. For just adding one thing, not very much. Like literally crunching the numbers, if you were to get let's say you've got two scenarios. You could get two of the entry-level plan, one for you, one for your kid, or you could get this thing and then add the bundle onto it. If you just done it with one thing, it works out $1 cheaper. So really not a massive kind of saving, and with the benefit that you can share the data, at least in theory, between those. So you've got the first plan that you qualify has quite a lot of data. It's 120 gig a month, I think, on the $58 Telstra plan. You add the second one on, that adds on 15 gig, but that means you've got 135 gig to share between the two
families. What are you paying for that second plan?
And so for the second plan, you're paying $47. So you're paying $115. If you bought the two plans, it cost you $116. So, yeah.
$47 for 15 gig doesn't sound like a good deal if you shopped around.
It is not a good deal.
Well, we can get to that. There is also this option, and this one does feel like it might be a little bit better, that you can bundle in a mobile broadband SIM for $10 a month with 10 gig. So that's the throw it in the tablet, throw it in the hotspot. You've got a mobile broadband solution that you can then share around to whoever you like, of course. And that's not bad, but it does have the caveat you can't just rock up to Telstra and say, here's my $10, give me the SIM. It's still going to be bundled with one of these other more expensive plans. It's got to be part of the family bundle.
Yeah. It's no great shock that these are not particularly good value because we know this is the case across the board with mobile plans. We know that the most expensive plans tend to be from the big three, and of the big three, Telstra is always the most expensive of the lot, and it's a badge it wears with some honour, I think. It's not looking to be super, super cheap. So, but it really does raise the question, even assuming you want to, the convenience of, I've only got one bill does not seem worth spending all that extra money to me. I feel like you could deal with it better.
There's also some really, and this is one of those instances where it really is worth digging into the consumer information summary, dig into the detail, because there's also some really odd little limitations on this. So that secondary family SIM can't do satellite calls. Now, that's very fringe. That's very niche, whether or not you'd need that. But you also can't access Telstra Air, which genuinely surprised me. And there's no support for eSIM. So you've actually got to have a physical SIM, which you're going to throw into your child's phone. I would have thought Telstra would have been all over the eSIM angle on this because it's just cheaper and easier for them to maintain.
You would think so, but then it's not always totally surprising that, they sort of mess around with those things. Remembering, again, as we go to Telstra Reminiscence, this was the company where it used to be the way they set up your account determined whether you could buy certain products. It gets messy. So, and also, does anyone really use Telstra Air anyway?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is it even still around? It was the big thing that went nowhere, wasn't it? Or the thing they couldn't charge for.
I see the kind of pink telephone boxes here and there. So presumably it's still, and I think I see the network every once in a while when I wander into my local shopping centre. So presumably it's still there. I'm just surprised that they've said, well, actually you can't use it. I would have thought they'd be keen to sell it as still, ping it as an advantage. But instead they've said, no Telstra Air for you because you are the child of someone else or you are a family member of someone else who quite possibly does get full Telstra Air access. What's really odd here as well is when you look at, and then Gus, you mentioned this before, the big three, the network players, you look at what they do with sharing, it's quite different for Optus, and it's quite different again for Vodafone. So Optus's family deal runs you $165 a month, which sounds like a lot of money, and obviously it's more than your $115 for your two SIMs. But that's because it's for 4 SIMs, and you get 320 gig across all 4 SIMs to share, which is $41.25 a month per SIM if you want to cut it down that way. That could be reasonable value. I'm not necessarily advocating for it or not, but that could be reasonable value. But it's quite different to what Telstra's doing, isn't it?
Here's my question about these data sharing things: are there limits on what a family member can use? Can one kid clean you out?
Yes, one kid can, generally speaking. Like, if the detail varies between each provider, but normally the idea is it's a pool of data and people can dive into it. And I think in some cases, I think with Vodafone very specifically, it's just there and you can't control it. There might be some controls in I've got an idea Optus might have some controls in that area. It's a while since I've played with those plans.
I actually think Telstra and Voda do it as well. Well, actually, Telstra does. Voda, which we'll get to in a second, may not, because their deal is slightly different. I think they do. Of course, the thing to bear in mind is depending on the plans that you're on, it might not be quite as much of a problem as it used to be because, for example, with the Telstra plans that we're talking about, if you go through all the data, you no longer get the, it's $10 a gigabyte and say wave bye-bye to your wallet kind of system. You get the, you're just speed capped. And it's like 1.5 meg. It's not great. You're definitely going to feel it.
Family speed capped because one kid went crazy on YouTube on the train?
Presumably, it would be.
I would be furious at that point.
But the point is, you're furious with your child. You're not necessarily furious with the telco.
Yeah,
who just wanted to help you, Adam.
I've looked at, because it's come up before. I'm with Boost, and the rest of my family is now on Boost as well. And for reasons that I still don't understand and I need to sort out with them, somehow my son's account ended up linked to my account, so I can see his data usage when I look on my phone. Now, we've got, 100, 200 gig for 12 months, something ridiculous amount. Whenever I look at it, I'm like, okay, Adam, you've used a tiny fraction of it over however many months. My son somehow manages to keep on track. I don't know what he's doing with it, but he's using a shed load of data. And I'm like, well, that's fine. I don't care because it's his data. But if we were all pulled together, I would have to lay down the law to make sure that he wasn't cleaning us all out. And I know that my kids are pretty trustworthy when it comes to that. I'm sure some kids aren't. So you really maybe don't want to put yourself in that position where your the phone that you need for work, the phone that you need for whatever is at the mercy of how much YouTubing your kid's done on the tram.
Well, again, that comes down to the controls, and it does come down to an extent to the plans that you are on and the amount of data that's there. There's certainly a reasonable quantity of data, as it were, a reasonable quantity of research that actually suggests that a lot of plans are sold with the expectation that people won't use all the data that is within them. You're right. Certain individuals, will use more or less, and I don't want to become the, old man shouting at the cloud that you just did there, Adam. But actually, this is a good time to bring in what Vodafone does, which is different again, just to make it even more confusing, because they let you pull up to 10 plans.
10?
Into a data pool. Now, they have a couple of specific plans that they say, no, you can't data pool these ones, but the vast majority of their plans, they say, yep, look, you can just make this a big data pool that everyone shares, up to 10 plans. However, Adam, take a wild, crazy guess. You've said, right, yes, I will data pool all of these plans. What kind of discount, what kind of benefit do you think Vodafone gives you for saying, yes, these are all in one big data pool?
For letting your brother-in-law use your mobile plan.
Something like that?
Yeah. I would expect a considerable one. I don't know, 10, 20%. I want some kind of benefit.
You foolish, foolish person.
The answer is...
nothing! Absolutely nothing!
You just create a data pool. There is no specific discount. You just pick the plans that you want and you say, these are all in a data pool, and then they are. And that's all you get. Now, to be fair to Vodafone, their plans are typically a little bit cheaper for a little bit more data compared to Telstra and Optus. And I guess you could make the case that because they're not saying, as Telstra is, the data SIM is this, the child SIM is this 15 gig plan or nothing, you could mix and match all kinds of crazy combinations for your data needs, but there's no specific discount on the plans offered at this time.
But also, the more people you put on the plan, the greater the chance of somebody cleaning you out.
Yes.
Yes, it's bad enough having...
I've met your son.
It's bad enough having your partner and kids on it, as well as, your brother-in-law and your nephews and nieces and mother-in-law and who knows what else. It only takes one of them, and they've cleaned out the entire family.
So
It's going to be
Vodafone
an
do
awkward Christmas
state
dinner.
that you can, and I'm quoting here directly, worry less about bill shock with control over who can use the data pool. But that, to me, almost brings in the reverse problem that you've got, whoever the lead of the family is, and that is going to vary by family, and that is totally fine. But whoever is in charge then sits there doling out bits of data here, there, and everywhere. And you've got one or more family member who burns through their stuff legitimately, then has to go cap in hand going, please, sir, can I have some more?
Which one of my brother-in-laws is the favourite? Who do I want to give more to? Who do I want to give none to?
Yeah. So I think in summary, we've learned, first of all, that most of Adam's family hate him for very good reason. But secondly, that look, these things, they're incredibly confusing and they're incredibly messy. Yeah. And it genuinely seems to me that both economically and organisationally, you would just be better off finding a good value SIM and getting one of those for each family member who needs it and just leaving it like that. And there are lots of offers that are way more competitive than this, especially when you start looking outside the big three.
Well, this is an interesting point to raise because that $47 Telstra, bringing it back to the Telstra family thing where they're pitching it as big value, for $47, Gus, I'm not wrong in thinking I don't have to go very, very far to get more than 15 gig, do I?
Oh, not at all. You can get, you can easily get 4 times that amount. Staying within the Telstra network, if you're not so worried about which network you're on, you could get heaps more than that. There are plans out there at the moment where you can get 120 gig for $25 on the Optus network. So there's a lot of ways you could get more data without going in for one of these pools.
So what I still don't understand, why do people go with the big three then? Because they think they're the trustworthy ones or they've always been with them?
There's yes and yes. Yeah, yes and yes. There's so much switching inertia. When people are with services, they tend not to change. They stick with them. And you have that added overflow effect that in the case of Telstra, there's a perception that especially in regional areas, you're just getting a better service. So those things combine. And then people go, oh, this sounds good. I'm told this is a good family bundle. Most people don't do the digging in. I would hope that Vertical Hold listeners are probably amongst the more aware ones and are thinking about this harder. But we know that in a lot of cases, people just say, yeah, I've heard of that. It seems safe. It seems reliable. And they don't actually put the time into finding out, oh, I could actually do a lot better than this.
There are, look, to give them their due, there are or were some benefits to being with those big players. So, for example, up until relatively recently, if you were with Optus, you generally got Optus Sport thrown in, which was very important to you if you were into round ball football, which, as regular listeners will know, I am not particularly. Telstra's had its whole deal, and I don't know where this sits at the moment, again, because I'm not into sports codes, with AFL and NRL where you could view them on your mobile and it didn't cost you data. So you had bonuses like that the MVNOs did not offer because they were just competing on price. But I guess once you start getting up into these really big gigabyte-heavy plans, maybe that doesn't matter so much.
But the other thing is, and we've talked about this before on the show, that the Telstra network is not always the Telstra network. There's a whole lot of MVNOs that use the Telstra network or parts of the Telstra network, and we can go over what some of them are. But is it the same with Optus and Vodafone or TPG or phone or whatever they are? If you're on one of their resellers, do you have access to the full network or only parts of the network?
Very often only parts of the network, especially with the cheaper plans. Now, it varies from MVNO to MVNO that they will get access. And we've seen that pattern with Telstra. We see it with the others as well. So, yeah, if those things matter to you, if you're wanting those higher level parts of the network, then yes, that may constrain your choice more than price. If you're determined to say, I want, the whole 4G network or part of the 5G network, you won't have as many choices.
Where that can come in, well, I mean, there's sort of two areas where that can come into play from an observational point of view, and some of this is sadly anecdotal, which is the worst kind of data. But the two areas where that can come in play, very, very, very hyper-regional areas. So Telstra being the example that actually shares a lot of maps for this. If you're in very far north Queensland and travelling regionally, there are some areas in its wholesale map where it cuts out, but the actual Telstra network still extends to. Now, I will say, I have not driven those roads, and I don't know whether or not you will in fact drop off, or if this is all a simulation and it covers out as best it can. But the other thing, and again, we've talked about this before on the show, is that you do sometimes hit on those wholesale plans, the MVNO ones. You do sometimes hit outages where the full fat network can be a little better. I've observed this, and Adam, I know you've observed this in the past as well.
how hard is it to actually get these details out of the telcos and the MVNOs about who does what? Because we sort of get the impression that Belong is Telstra's budget plan, so they have access to the full Telstra network. Now, Boost seems to have a friends with benefits deal with Telstra that they don't necessarily want to talk about, but somehow they've got access to the full network where the other MVNOs don't. Will the others answer questions? Will the Telstra and will the Vodafone and Optus resellers tell you exactly what you're doing and don't get?
It gets very confusing. We've just seen, one of the things that's just happened this week is that Aldi is now getting some access to 5G, which they haven't had before. So that's a potential area you can get into. Some of the others, a lot of them are fairly careful to specify that you only get part of the network. That's actually pretty typically what you see. I was amusing myself. I went to check on Amasim's site, Amasim being the biggest MVNO in Australia, to see what their 5G access is. And their 5G help page literally has the words 5G on it and nothing else. It doesn't have a map. It doesn't have any text.
Which is fabulous when you consider that Amasim is wholly owned by Optus.
Okay.
It's not actually an independent brand anymore. But yes, its 5G help is, here's the word 5G. Hope that helps.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a 5 and a G.
But, to more broadly answer your question, I guess to more broadly address listener concern, honestly, the best way to do this is to test it out, is to take the $2 punt on the SIM or the $5 punt on the SIM and see how it goes. Typically, that'll get you on board, and they'll give you not much data, not much. Well, actually, these days the same amount of calling inclusions, because that stuff is just so low cost it doesn't make any difference. But basically, to give it a try and see, bearing in mind, mobile number porting is very well established and generally, not 100% of the time, but generally goes very smoothly, very easily. The easiest way to save a lot of money on your mobile plan is to switch about every 2 to 3 months, because special deals come along, especially within the MVNO space, all the time. Most of them run 2 to 3 months, and then you flick over to someone else who'll be happy to have your money and happy to give you more data. In the meantime, the ones you were with, reinstate that deal and you jump back to them. It is a little bit of work.
A nightmare.
But, Adam, the difference is you're saving money versus the convenience of these family bundles of staying with the incumbent telcos. And that's why the incumbent telcos win. It's exactly why I brought it up.
Until
it's a little bit
goes to shit and you've got nothing for a week. Are you telling me it's better than what it used to be?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is genuinely better.
If you look at the complaint figures coming out of the TIO and so on, it is
just being
genuinely
too
better.
Badly.
Oh, and I'm sure, and anyone who has been, I'm sure they will have greater reluctance to switch.
Yeah.
But that reluctance to switch is exactly what fuels the bigger profits for the big telcos.
And even if you've got to be a special kind of frugal Scottish obsessive like myself to want to do that all the time. But I think the reality is that it's worth it. It is genuinely worth switching once. And if you're happy with that provider, stay with them. And maybe do the thing of saying to them, hey, can you do me a better deal? Because they'll often lean into that and you don't have to move your number. You don't have to stress about that. But I would venture to suggest that anybody who is with any of the big three should just be sitting down and taking a good hard look at themselves and then a good hard look at some alternative plans.
Yeah, maybe treat it in the way you meant to treat your smoke alarm battery. Just like set an alarm every 12 months and say, right, have a look at my plan, have a look at what I can get. Because then you're not switching every month. You're avoiding your horror show there, Adam. But you're not sticking on a plan, which is maybe quite bad value by now.
Crap, just hang on. I'll be back in a minute. You just reminded me of something I've got to do.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Gus for joining us in the virtual studio.
My pleasure, as always.
And Gus, it's time once again for you to face up to the patented low-calorie vertical hold 3 questions of doom. I'll ask all 3, and you can answer them in any order you like. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our current big contentious question, what's the worst thing you ever spent your own money on? Bearing in mind, I do know some of the weird things that Gus owns.
And bearing in mind that I've already admitted to buying a Bananarama tape earlier in the episode. But okay, so people can find my work online at finder.com.au. You can find me raving on Twitter at GusWorldAU. And I think the worst thing I've ever bought, the worst value, just the most pointless thing, was a hot dog maker. That's like the classic example of a dumb single-use appliance that no sane person ever should have bought, because it is literally quicker to cook your hot dog in the microwave, and the thing that's supposed to cook the rolls just doesn't do it. So that thing wasn't expensive, but it was an absolute utter waste.
Is this the type that has like the seriously like dangerous spike to like seriously mutilate your hot dog bun?
Yes, it could be useful to having around just in case you like maybe had to kill a vampire. But in terms of actually, getting your hot dog done, absolute total waste of time. Bought one, regretted it, ended up throwing it away.
Damn it, now I really want a hot dog. That's the only problem with that. But while I go and chase down a hot dog, you can catch us online at verticalhold.au on Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And just as a reminder for regular listeners, we're thrilled to have Aussie Broadband as our sponsor this year, and they've given us a special promo code which gives new customers a $10 per month discount for 6 months when signing up online for an unlimited plan between NBN 50 and NBN 100. The promo code is vertical, so hopefully that'll come in handy for Australian listeners shopping around for a great broadband service. And as always, thanks everyone for dropping by. Thanks for your great reviews. And thanks for helping us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. I reckon my favourite bit of the ACCC press release was Telstra has also undertaken to ensure that its board of directors, CEO, and other senior staff are given competition law compliance training. Now that's comedy gold. I imagine that training will include an extensive number of case studies dating back many decades. Maybe Sol could be a guest lecturer.